The classic Universal monster movies represent a fascinating intersection of cultural anxieties, moral allegories, and artistic innovation. These films, centered around iconic creatures like Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, and the Wolfman, resonate with audiences because they embody a wide range of psychological, societal, and existential themes. In 2020, director Leigh Whannel modernized the classic character the Invisible Man by bringing forward themes current to our time. And now he's back with Wolfman.
My husband was infected by some kind of animal. Blake, you're scaring me. Back off!
Rated R, theaters January 17th.
So, in anticipation of the film's January 17th release, I wanted to break down the history and origins of this classic Universal monster. This video is sponsored by Blumhouse and Universal Pictures. Leigh Whannel's Wolfman gives you something new and takes you inside the mind and heart of the monster, allowing you to experience the complexity and conflict within him while exploring the idea. What happens when someone you love becomes unrecognizable to you? Or when someone you trust becomes a danger? Now, in our post-pandemic world, our nuclear family units have become smaller, and our distrust of the outside world has grown. The new Wolfman looks to explore what happens if the unknown danger outside makes its way in. Not just inside the home, but inside a spouse and parent. Whannel is looking to break expectations for a monster movie by subverting the tropes of the genre while still respecting what works within the films that have become classics, like David Cronenberg's The Fly and John Carpenter's The Thing, both movies that take their titular monsters seriously. I'll touch more on how the new Wolfman looks to move the IP and the genre forward, but in order to do that, we first gotta understand what's so special about the original. To learn everything you need to know about the original Wolfman, the meaning of his encounters with other monster icons, and what it all means for the character in the modern day, stick around to the end of this video. Welcome to Horror History, and this time we are really going back into horror's history to analyze and celebrate one of the original cornerstones of the genre. Hailing from the Universal classic monsters, one of the most iconic and enduring franchises of all time, the Wolfman originated in his 1941 self-titled movie, The Wolfman. But the timeline after that can be a little confusing. What to include in the classic era of Universal monsters is probably debatable, but if we go by Universal's own release, Classic Monsters Complete 30-Film Collection, it began in 1931 with Dracula and continued on until 1956's The Creature Walks Among Us. Universal Classic Monsters is often credited with being the first shared cinematic universe in movie history, but it wasn't always planned to be that way. At the beginning, each monster got their own movie, and most of them got direct sequels. It wasn't until 1943's Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman that the idea of a shared universe was introduced. So while the crossover movies are sequels to the solo franchises, the continuity can be a little loose until the shared universe begins. In the case of the Wolfman, it doesn't make a huge difference, because he only had one solo movie before appearing in the shared universe, and all of his subsequent appearances in the classic era are all part of the shared universe. Makes things pretty easy. The other easy one to map out is the Mummy, because he never crossed over. Guess he was too wrapped up in his own franchise. The creature from the Black Lagoon also did not surface in anyone else's movies. The fact that the Wolfman was in on the action for all of the crossover films shows how big of a deal he was. Not even Dracula can claim that he did that. And not only was he important in universe, but the Wolfman proved to be a major influence in our world and how Hollywood and pop culture would depict the werewolf mythos going forward. But to illuminate the full picture of the Wolfman, I've got to shine some moonlight on how he came to bear the mark of the beast when he came back home in 1941. Lawrence Stewart Talbot, most commonly known as Larry, was born in 1910 or 1911 based on his age at the time of his first death. Larry was the son of John Talbot and younger brother of John Jr. In fact, it looks like there was a long tradition of Johns and Lawrences dating back hundreds of years. As a young man, Larry moved away from his family in Wales and went to the US. At some point, he worked for an optics company in California, where he helped put together the Mount Wilson Observatory. He seems to have a casual fascination with telescopes, but his wandering eye would eventually lead him into trouble. When Larry's older brother is killed in a hunting accident, he comes back home to spend some time with his father, where he accidentally finds himself in a late-night clash with a werewolf, an event that would change the course of history forever. Larry Talbot would return home to his father's estate in Llanwelly, Wales after the death of his brother John in a hunting accident, and he hasn't seen his dad in a while. During his visit, his dad receives a new part for his telescope, and Larry helps him put it together. He's more of a handyman than he is an astronomer, though. Instead of gazing for stars, he finds himself checking out a woman named Gwen in the neighborhood, living above an antique shop. That afternoon, he goes into the shop to meet her by asking for the earrings that he saw her putting on in her room.
What I'm really looking for is something half-moon shaped with spangles on it, golden.
Oh, I'm sorry, we haven't any like that just now.
Oh, yes, you have. Don't you remember? on your dressing table up in your room.
Now, I'm not a girl. I can't pretend to understand how the female mind works, but ladies, maybe you can let me know. Is this negative Riz? Because I kind of feel like this is negative Riz.
But were they not for sale?
Well, I can't say that I blame you. They look so well on you.
She won't sell him the earring, so he ends up buying a cane with a silver wolf topper. She explains that it has a pentagram, the mark of the beast, making this particular wolf a werewolf.
That's a human being who at certain times of the year changes into a wolf.
You mean runs around on all fours and bites and snaps and bays at the moon?
The idea of the werewolf legend seems to be pretty common knowledge among almost everyone that Larry meets. They're all familiar with the lore thanks to this old poem.
There's an old poem. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright.
However, most do not actually believe in the supernatural. The condition of transforming into a werewolf is called lycanthropy, and depending on the beliefs of who you're asking, there are two definitions. Some see it as a psychological illness where someone believes that they're a wolf, while others use the word to describe someone who actually goes back and forth between man and wolf. Talbot isn't taking the wolf stuff too seriously, and he buys the cane from Gwen, but never reveals how he knew about the earrings. Instead, he offers to take her out that night to explain it, but she turns him down. Twice. So that night, as she's leaving, he shows up anyway. Again, I kind of feel like this is negative Riz, and I kind of feel like it's call the cops. Maybe that's too far, but she might want to have her guard up. Gwen tries to set him up with her friend Jenny, and the three of them all go to get their fortunes told by the traveling gypsies who are in town. But this choice would end up changing their lives forever. While Jenny is off having her fortune told, Larry takes Gwen for a walk and finds out that she's set to be engaged, but he continues to flirt with her. In the 1940s, going after a woman who's engaged was seen as taboo. In fact, the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America had these censorship codes at the time known as Hays Codes, which famously influenced the production of Casablanca, which came out just 1 year after The Wolfman. The idea of adultery was not allowed to be expressly confirmed and thus had to be implied.
But what about us?
We'll always have Paris.
Whereas today, many guys have adopted a code closer in line with a cultural touchstone of our own time, the Michael Scott mindset.
That's what she said.
No, the other one.
She's engaged.
BFD, engaged ain't married.
So even Larry and Gwen walking together was seen as unacceptable.
How dare you permit her to walk out with other men when she's engaged to Frank Andrews?
In the 40s, couples typically had shorter engagements, and there was this rising culture of going steady that would become the dominant form of dating by the 1950s.
Jeff, Marie is my friend. Besides, everybody knows you two are going steady.
All of this is to say that Talbot's pursuit of a soon-to-be married woman was a little risque. We'll come back to this. Their late-night walk is interrupted when the two hear the howl of a wolf and the screams of Jenny. Talbot goes towards the sound and finds Jenny being attacked by this wolf. He beats it down with the silver-topped end of the cane, but incurs a bite on his chest in the process, causing him to lose consciousness until Gwen is able to get him home with the help of one of the gypsies. He later finds out that Jenny's throat was ripped out by the wolf's teeth, and the gypsy fortune teller was also killed. His skull was found bashed in, and Talbot's new cane was found nearby. The next day, Talbot wakes up with his chest wound apparently healed, and a detective at his bedside ready to question him.
Yeah, go ahead. But don't try to make me believe that I killed a man when I know that I killed a wolf.
Yes. We're all a little bit confused.
Not quite the reassurance that he wanted to hear. The doctor suggests that Larry is mentally disturbed by the shock, alluding to the original idea of lycanthropy being a mental condition. One evening, Larry witnesses the fortune teller's coffin being transported to a church where he overhears Maliva, the fortune teller's mother, leaving her deceased boy with some parting words.
Your suffering is over, Bale, my son. Now you will find peace.
So Larry is left to wonder what suffering she's talking about, not knowing that he would soon become very familiar with it. Talbot begins to see more and more evidence that the werewolf legend is true, and he's been afflicted by it. When he visits Gwen to express his condolences about Jenny, she introduces him to her fiancé, Frank Andrews, who has a dog who won't stop barking upon seeing him, and Frank himself is transfixed by Larry's walking stick. They would meet again later at the fair and play a shooting game, but Talbot can't bring himself to shoot this wolf target.
Go ahead and shoot before he bites you.
Little late for that. After the fair, he runs into the gypsy Maliva, who explains that her son was a werewolf, and Larry was able to kill him with the silver handle of his cane because silver is a werewolf's only weakness. She explains the rules to him. Since he was bitten, he He too has become a werewolf who will transform when the moon is full, but wearing this pentagram charm can break the evil spell. He doesn't believe her though, and he gives the charm to Gwen, still trying to win her heart. He kisses her, but the moment is interrupted by the gypsies packing up and leaving town in a hurry, and Gwen, with mixed feelings about the encounter, uses this as an opportunity to split. He soon learns that they're leaving because the werewolf is rumored to be back. That night, eve of the full moon, Talbot begins to experience symptoms of the oncoming transformation. Fur growing on his legs and feet, toenails turn to claws, and eventually canine teeth, clawed fingers, a face of fur, and a snarled voice. Talbot's transformation into the Wolfman leaves him as a bipedal humanoid creature, more of a half-man, half-wolf situation, whereas the werewolf that attacked him was on all fours, giving the appearance of an actual wolf. So what could be the reason for this difference? Obviously it's done for practical reasons. Older movies were an evolution of the stage play, and as a result, they put a lot of value on being able to see the actors act. In order to make the Wolfman an actual wolf, they probably would have had to use a puppet, which probably would not have looked great. But from a narrative standpoint, Larry's more human-looking wolf transformation may have been designed to remind the audience of his humanity. His character arc emphasizes the internal struggle between man and beast, with his human side symbolizing his higher human brain, following the proper rules of society, and his beast side representing the temptation of his biological animalistic urges. He finds himself in a war with these two sides, highlighted in his relationship with Gwen. As I mentioned earlier, going after an engaged woman would have been deemed improper behavior, but ever since spotting her in the telescope, he can't help but go talk to her, ask her out, and it's no coincidence that he kisses her right before his transformation into an animal. His primitive human instincts are kicking in. He can't help his attraction to her, even if he should have just turned the telescope away from her window in the first place. The werewolf that bit him, on the other hand, is implied to have dealt with this curse for a long time, and when Jenny gets her fortune told, he sees the mark of the beast on her hand, indicating that she'll be his next victim, and he sends her away in a fit of shame, knowing what's about to happen. He's already succumbed to his animalistic side, and so he appears as an actual wolf. But for Talbot, retaining some of his human features doesn't stop him from losing control and taking his first victim. Talbot's first victim as the Wolfman is a gravedigger, who he jumps and severs his jugular with his teeth. He awakes the next morning, unable to remember the previous night, but finds wolf tracks leading from his window to his bed. Upon learning about the gravedigger's death, he plays dumb. His dad tells him lycanthropy is a variety of schizophrenia, the belief that somebody is a wolf.
It's a technical expression for something very simple: the good and evil in every man's soul. In this case, evil takes the shape of an animal.
His dad clarifies that there are actually shades of gray between the black and white binary of good and evil, representing the good versus evil metaphor in lycanthropy, but also representing his own feelings towards Gwen, the complicated guilt he feels over his attraction to her. When he sees her at church the next day, he avoids eye contact in an attempt to suppress those urges, and steps out before the ceremony begins. That afternoon, he expresses his new fear that he's a werewolf to his doctor. He too believes that lycanthropy is just a disease of the mind, and that one could be hypnotized into believing that he's a werewolf by mass hysteria. The next night, Talbot transforms again, but this time he's caught in an animal trap and he's saved by Maliva, who seems to say an incantation that temporarily turns him back into a man. Maliva advises him to escape because men with hunting dogs are out looking for the beast. On the way home though, he can't help but toss rocks at Gwen's window. He tells her he's leaving town and she begs to go with him. It's a surprising turn of character for her, but she feels like she can help him. It might be because she was the one to introduce him to the werewolf legend and she feels guilty for planting the idea in him. Or it might be because of a previously mentioned argument with her fiance. Either way, it's a seriously rash decision. She's only known the dude for like one moon cycle, which is a little under a month. In any event, he doesn't trust himself around her because of his uncontrolled tendency to kill, so conflicted, he has to vow that he's going alone. She insists that the charm will protect her, and it's not really clear if she believes that he's physically transforming or if she, like most others, just sees it as a mental condition. I'm leaning towards the latter because of the fact that she believes that she can cure him. But he's shaken up when he sees the mark of the beast on her hand, meaning that she will be his next victim. Before leaving, he admits everything to his father, who still finds it hard to believe that he's a real werewolf. Worried that he'll go out again against his own will, his dad can only convince him to stay home by tying him to a chair and locking his windows. Before his dad heads out though, Larry insists that he take the cane for protection, just in case he escapes the room, which, inevitably, he does. The men hunting the surrounding area shoot him, but it has no effect. Still not believing his tale of caution, they joke about the reason that he didn't go down.
I could have sworn I hit him dead on. And I too. Have you forgotten it takes a silver bullet for a werewolf?
Gwen also goes towards the commotion as the Wolfman skulks through the fog-dusted thickets. Eventually, she's spotted, and in the final exhibit of his unchecked condition, he goes after her, once more linking his internal human dilemma over his feelings towards her to his situation of being caught between wolf and man. The hunting party hears her screams, and Talbot's dad, not recognizing the transformation of his boy, beats him down with the silver end of the staff. In death, the Wolfman transforms back into Larry Talbot, causing his father to realize that he's just lost his second son in the most tragic way possible. When the rest of the hunting party shows up and they see the body, they conclude that Larry must have lost his life while protecting Gwen from the wolf, and John Talbot accidentally bashed his son in the head during the scuffle. It's not clear if they actually believe that, or if they've come to realize that Larry really was a werewolf, and are going with that story in order to prevent the town from going into hysteria. It's kind of left open to interpretation, and the script has a different ending, so it doesn't offer any additional insights. But I think the ending we got speaks to the shades of gray between good and evil that were discussed earlier. Larry will go down as a hero, even though he was in fact the monster, or at least some part of him was the monster. But that's the story that probably is the least damaging for everyone involved. Gwen goes back to her fiance, and fittingly, with the death of the Wolfman comes the death of the will they won't they affair between Gwen and her new suitor. But in the world of Universal monsters, such an icon cannot stay dead for long. Lawrence is put to rest in his family's tomb, and 4 years go by, at which point grave robbers break in, open his tomb, and find it filled with wolfsbane. Larry looks like he's asleep rather than dead. He hasn't decomposed at all. The grave robber steals his ring, and right after this, Larry springs to life and grabs the thief by the wrist. I wonder if this ring was another charm, protecting him from resurrection. He wasn't wearing it the night he died, which means it must have been put on him for his funeral, possibly by Maliva, who seems to understand the werewolf lore better than anyone. Or maybe his resurrection has more to do with the conditions of the curse. Even a man who's pure of heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the moon is full and bright. The coffin is filled with wolfsbane, and there's a window in the mausoleum. It's a full moon. Maybe by opening his coffin and allowing the moonlight to shine on him, the grave robbers inadvertently revived him. In any case, he escapes his tomb and is found by a police officer in the nearby city of Cardiff and transported to a local hospital where they give him some kind of surgery to address the fracture in his skull. He recovers faster than expected and can't remember how he hurt his head, or at least that's what he says. But even after coming back from death, he hasn't recovered from his problem. When the moon is full, Larry transforms into the Wolfman and mauls a police officer. When doctors find him the next morning, he asks them to call the police, realizing that he's a murderer and hoping to turn himself in. He tries explaining his condition to them, but the police inspector thinks that he's lying about his identity because Lawrence Talbot died 4 years ago. This gives him the realization that he can't truly die no matter what he does. So he goes searching for Maliva, scouring the entirety of Europe and no doubt leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. Eventually he finds her and she offers to watch over him as she did with her own son. She speaks of a man who can help him, and that man is Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Maliva and Talbot seek out Dr. Frankenstein because she's heard that he has a deeper understanding of the secrets of life and death. Together, they travel to Frankenstein Village to find him, but while getting directions at a local bar, discover that he passed away years ago. Talbot is depressed, thinking there's no hope for him to die, and worried that he'll have to live forever with the guilt of his involuntary actions and pain of his transformation. That night, he takes the life of a waitress, prompting an angry mob from the townspeople. It always amazes me in these movies how there always seems to be an angry mob on standby. It seems like everybody is always down to be part of an angry mob or search party. Like they don't have anything better to do. I guess nothing has actually changed and now this just takes place on the internet. The mob proves large enough that the Wolfman runs away, which I find interesting. Talbot may not have control over his actions, but he still has his basic instincts. He flees towards Frankenstein's castle and falls through the ground into an icy cavern, which is where he wakes up the next morning. While searching for a way out, he makes a startling discovery. Dr. Frankenstein's monster, trapped inside the ice and alive. We don't see the scene where they become friends, but we can assume that he was able to befriend the monster because he wasn't afraid of dying and thus was not afraid of the monster. In the 1931 Frankenstein film, it's the townspeople's fear of the monster that causes him to feel rejected and go on a rampage. Talbot asks the monster to lead him to where the late doctor's records are kept, a secret compartment in the library, but he doesn't find what he's looking for there. Finding the records ends up being a long process, involving contacting Dr. Frankenstein's daughter and convincing her to share where they're located, which is only possible after the monster creates chaos chaos at the local festival, and she agrees to help find the research notes with plans to use that info to drain the life from her father's monstrous creation. By pulling a secret string in the secret compartment, Elsa Frankenstein opens the secret sliding door to unveil the secret diary, the secrets of life and death. Which is secret. There, they learned the key to the monster's eternal life. He's been supercharged with a special energy equaling that of hundreds of lifetimes.
This, my creation, can never perish unless its energies are drained off artificially by changing the poles from plus to minus.
But Talbot is more interested in the secrets of death and theorizes that his life energy could be drained in the same way. So, with the help of his doctor, they repair Frankenstein's lab, hoping to perform the reverse of his life creation experiment and put Talbot out of his misery. The whole setup creates an interesting ethical dilemma. The original Frankenstein focused on the dangers of playing God by trying to artificially create life in the name of scientific progress. The process of creating life could lead to breakthroughs in biology and medicine, and perhaps even human immortality. But doing so happens at the risk of the new creation. The monster could endure suffering, and as everyone would find out, rampage out of control. Maybe creating life should be left up to God or nature after all. By introducing the Wolfman into this paradigm, we're forced to consider the other end of the dilemma. Should mankind have control over death, or would this also be better left to God or nature? The pros of going through with the experiment are that Talbot could finally rest in peace, and innocent lives could be saved by him giving up his own life. But there are ethical questions about if this is the right thing to do. Even if Larry wants to die, there's no way of knowing if this would actually be more peaceful than his current existence. And even if it is, where do you draw the line as far as what the acceptable amount of suffering is to warrant an assisted suicide? We also don't know the psychological effects that this would have on the executioner. Would he be overrun with guilt or go mad with power?
I saw my father become obsessed by his power. He died a horrible death, just as my grandfather did.
Finally, there could be other unforeseen complications, as there were with Frankenstein and his monster. Life and death may just be something that humankind should never meddle with. This ethical dilemma is still something that's relevant in the modern day. Just last year, Ecuador became the latest country to legalize euthanasia, or the painless killing of a patient suffering from an incurable and painful disease. In the real world, this is a very complicated issue. You have some that believe that killing is never okay, even if it ends suffering, because of religious reasons. On the other side, some believe that they should have the freedom to decide if they want to continue their own life, and find forcing someone to live in pain to just be unethical. The anti-euthanasia group will argue that the existence of euthanasia as an option will cause patients to stop fighting their illnesses, and those who may have otherwise overcome their ailments will end up dying. But the pro-euthanasia group will say that the procedure will also help those who are still alive, by freeing up hospital resources and allowing healthcare funds to go towards those who have a chance to survive. Intentionally or not, this is kind of reflected in our situation with the Wolfman, because his death will save the lives of others every full moon. Euthanasia could also cut down on dangerous methods of suicide by being a pain-free medically assisted alternative. So while there's no doubt that legalization could potentially help people, there is still that Frankenstein dilemma. What about the unintended side effects of giving humans the power to choose between life and death? As with anything, legalizing it could potentially lead to abuse. For example, in Portugal, medically assisted suicide is only available to terminally ill adults. But in the Netherlands, there are options to provide it to terminally ill children with parental consent. How can you ever be sure that the parents are doing it in good faith? And even with adults, how do you determine that someone is mentally fit to make that decision? And who's responsible for deciding if the patient is deemed unfit?
But he's insane.
He is not insane. He simply wants to die.
Some countries already have systems in place for delegating a medical power of attorney, but you can just imagine it becoming more controversial when euthanasia is involved. This also ties into the situation with Larry Talbot, because most people believe that his lycanthropy is just a belief that he's a wolf, not that he's actually transforming. Perhaps the most contentious question is how much suffering is enough suffering to warrant euthanasia? There's no answer that will make everyone happy for any of this. Just like any divisive issue, it's going to come down to individual personal beliefs. It's very much like the abortion debate, but taking place at the other end of a person's life. All I can say for certain is that it takes a great story to spark a discussion that becomes so timeless. And you have to credit whoever decided to make the first crossover happen between Frankenstein's monster and the Wolfman, rather than the obvious choice of Frankenstein's monster and Dracula. Because this pairing creates a much more interesting moral quandary. But the question remains, how does this story end? After repairing the lab in Frankenstein Castle, Talbot rushes the doctor to perform the operation that night so that he doesn't have to experience another spell. But while reading Frankenstein's notes, the doctor is overcome with ambition.
I can't do it. I can't destroy Frankenstein's creation. I've
got to see it at its full power.
In short, all hell breaks loose. Elsa tries to stop him from giving the monster even more power, but stopping the machine allows Talbot to live until the next full moon and transform. The monster also escapes the operation table and kidnaps the girl, but the Wolfman loses control and attacks the monster. On top of that, a local from the village blows up the dam, providing power to the lab, so the ferocious battle between the supernatural and the unnatural is interrupted, washed away in a great flood. The answer to these powerful questions would never come, and although this was no act of nature, there is something divine about a flood being the thing to prevent a man from playing God. Things pick back up about a year later, more or less 1946. A new mad scientist, Dr. Gustav Niemann, who once idolized Dr. Frankenstein, shows up in Frankenstein village looking for his lost secrets, and discovers the ruins of the castle.
Evidently the force of the flood had burst through that wall and washed everything into the cave beyond. Better look for the records in there.
That's where they find the Wolfman and Frankenstein's monster, frozen in time from their last encounter, and decide to thaw them out, hoping they'll have info about Dr. Frankenstein's records. I noticed that they immediately recognize the Wolfman upon seeing him, and after thawing him out, the doctor already knows Talbot's name and story, meaning that his legend has spread during his time under the ice, and they're a group of believers now, as opposed to before when people thought that Talbot was crazy for claiming that he's a werewolf. He curses Dr. Niemann for bringing him back, still under the belief that he can only find peace in death. But Niemann offers another option, claiming that with Frankenstein's records, he can build a new brain for him that will free him of his werewolf curse. They head back to Dr. Niemann's lab in Visseria, but on the way, this girl Ilonka meets and falls in love with Talbot, but he doesn't reciprocate any feelings for her, seemingly crushed by the depressing idea that he'll have to go through the werewolf transformations again. He knows he can never find love because the wolf side of him will just end up killing her.
We've been together 3 days and you haven't smiled once. I think I'd like you better if you smiled. Now don't start barking at me.
Yeah, not the best thing to say to someone who's cursed to turn into a dog-like creature and kill people. But Ilonka's feelings towards Talbot make Dr. Niemann's hunchback assistant Daniel jealous, and Talbot grows impatient with the constant delays, hoping to be cured before the next full moon. However, that doesn't happen, and a local storekeeper is killed. There's been one thing that's bothered me throughout Talbot's entire timeline. I don't get why he doesn't just have someone put him in a cage or something each night when there's going to be a full moon. We know that he escaped other methods of restraining himself, like being tied to a chair or a straitjacket, but you would think a steel cage would get the job done. I'm assuming that this wouldn't totally solve his problem though. He talks a lot about not being able to live with his curse, and while he's mostly talking about the guilt of being a murderer and not being able to control it, I assume there's also a physical pain associated with his transformations.
No, Doctor. No. I can't go through that again.
Otherwise, the cage would be a perfect solution. That being said, he should still probably do the cage, better than nothing. However, in this case, he loses faith in Dr. Niemann and resorts back to his plans to end his life.
And a werewolf doesn't just die, he must be killed.
By a silver bullet.
Fired by the hand of one who loves him enough to understand.
And once again, everyone in town forms an angry mob to find the werewolf. But tragically, Dr. Niemann's preparations for the brain transplant are complete just a moment too late, and Talbot transforms into the Wolfman once more. This did confuse me at first, but I eventually figured out that there will actually be a few nights of transformations each moon cycle. A moon cycle lasts 29.5 days, during which the sunlight gradually shifts across the moon's surface. So technically there's only one exact moment during each cycle where the moon is completely full, and I assumed that is when the transformation occurred. However, to the naked eye, the moon will appear to be full for 2 to 3 days, and that seems to be what triggers the transformation in Talbot, meaning that he may transform 2 to 3 nights in a row each month. And unfortunately for him, this would be one of those nights. When he runs into the woods, Ilonka goes after him and he attacks her, causing her to shoot him with a silver bullet. Like the time he was attacked with the cane with the silver handle, he transforms back into a man, or at least a plastic replica of one, and dies. Like his first death, it's only temporary. It seems that in the Universal Classic Monsters universe, silver bullets aren't actually a long-term solution for dealing with werewolves. The idea of using a silver bullet goes back to a French tale known as the Beast of Gévaudan. The story goes back to France in the 1760s, where there were hundreds of reports of attacks by a creature with varying descriptions, but many of them said it was a dog-like or wolf-like creature. There were allegedly hundreds of people killed, causing the town to dub the beast as a man-eating creature. As you can imagine, the rumors spread out of control. There were people saying that the beast could repel bullets or rise from the dead, but according to one of the stories, the beast was finally killed by a hunter who used a silver bullet. Today, it's believed that the Beast of Gévaudan was actually several large wolves or hyenas, but nonetheless, the legend of the Silver Bullet became intertwined with werewolf stories in Gothic literature and eventually popularized in films like The Wolfman. Adopting silver as the weakness for werewolves also makes sense, since it's often viewed as a pure metal, which goes along nicely with the weaknesses for other monsters, which are usually related to religious purity, like how vampires are weakened by a cross. Anyway, in this story, the Silver Bullet is enough to kill Talbot, but not permanently end his cursed existence. But this time, he would cross paths with another horror icon. At some point, Larry Talbot rose again and sought out yet another new doctor with hopes that this one could finally find a way to permanently kill him. This dude is going through doctors faster than the Bears go through coaches. It's not clear how long he was dead for this time, but at one point they discover Frankenstein's monster in the skeleton of Dr. Niemann, and it's stated that it's been multiple years.
That must be the skeleton of Dr. Niemann. Revitalized him years ago.
So at the earliest, it's 1948 when he reemerges. And this time, he finally took my idea and begged a police station to lock him up during the full moon. Here, he's introduced to Dr. Edelman, who witnesses the transformation occur in the jail cell and promises to do whatever he can to help him. The next morning, he conducts a thorough examination of Talbot using x-rays and other tests, and concludes that the issue is medical and believes that he can cure it.
Examination discloses one condition: pressure upon certain parts of the brain. This condition, coupled with your belief that the moon can bring about a change, accomplishes exactly that.
He hypothesized that this has an adverse effect on his metabolism, causing the fast production of hormones that transform him into a wolfman. And he believes the spores from this plant could be the key to reshaping his cranial cavity and saving it, but it'll take some time to produce enough of the plant. It's a clever diagnosis because it calls back to the very beginning, where lycanthropy was introduced to us as a disease of the mind, where in certain localities the victims actually assume physical forms of the wolf. It's just taking that definition literally. But for Talbot, he's been through this a few times before. He's tired of waiting, and he's lost faith in medicine, so he runs outside and throws himself into the ocean. But as you can guess, he's not successful in taking his life, and is later found by Dr. Edelman lurking in a seaside cavern. I think it's Dr. Edelman's bravery to seek him out during a full moon that changes Talbot's view on him. Sure, he's been burned by doctors that he worked with in the past, but that's because they were using him for personal reasons. Edelman actually seems to care about helping him, despite the fact that they barely know each other. And as an added bonus, the cave that they're in is an ideal place to grow the spore-producing plant that would cure his lycanthropy. And the doctor believes that this can be achieved before the next full moon. In the meantime, the doctor is also caring for Count Dracula, who he believes can be cured of his vampirism through blood transfusions, and decides not to revive Frankenstein's monster after the nurse convinces him that it's too dangerous, by citing man's responsibility to his fellow man. However, his well-intentioned experiments with the vampire cause him to become infected with Dracula's blood, and Edelman starts to become a vampire himself. This leads to a hypnotic vision where he's convinced to commit evil acts against humanity. However, he hasn't been totally overcome with evil, and he realizes he might not have much time left, and performs the operation on Larry.
We'll know in a few days, Melitzer. All we can do now is hope.
After this, Talbot still seems skeptical, and after 8 years of disappointment, he isn't confident that the treatment actually worked. He may also be unsure if he'll ever be able to find happiness, after all the lives he's taken and after losing everyone who ever got close to him. It's probably a combination of both. His story is really a tragic one, but one of the nurses promises him that he'll soon be able to see the full moon as everyone else does.
Restful, tranquil, and serene.
But it wouldn't end without some drama. The police question him about the crimes committed by the vampiric side of Dr. Edelman, who also tore out the throats of his victims. Larry saw Dr. Edelman leaving that night, but doesn't mention it to the police. Later, he expresses his concern, and the doctor fills him in about the failed blood transfusion. Knowing that Larry has been through something similar to what he's going through, Edelman asks him not to say anything to the police so that he can perform one more operation to help one of his nurses. When the night of the full moon arrives, Talbot asks the others to wait back as he goes out into the moonlight. And when the full moon rises, it has no effect on him. The Wolfman has finally been cured. But during the celebration, Dr. Edelman, once again overcome by his evil side, slips away into the lab, where he attempts to revive Frankenstein's monster, attacks his nurse, and seems to have gone completely mad. Talbot is forced to decide whether or not to stop the man. The doctor is clearly dangerous, but this is technically the same doctor who refused to give up on him when he wanted to die, and the same doctor who risked his life to confront him even when the Wolfman had taken over. So once again, Talbot finds himself in a moral dilemma. Does he show his loyalty to the man who had supported him, or does he carry out his responsibility to his fellow man by protecting the lives of those who Dr. Edelman might harm? In the end, he's forced to take the life of the Mad Doctor. Murder, the one thing that he'd hoped to avoid by curing his lycanthropy. There's no way to describe the ending of the Wolfman quadrilogy other than tragic. After fighting for so long to cure himself, he could never really escape the thing that he was running from. And it actually gets even more tragic, because this would not be the final appearance of the Universal classic iteration of the Wolfman. The final appearance of the classic Universal Wolfman would come in the 1948 film Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which, if we take this as a direct sequel to the last crossover film, House of Dracula, has Larry Talbot coming back, and it seems that his werewolf transformations have been happening again for a while now.
In a half an hour, the moon will rise and I'll turn into a wolf.
You and 20 million other guys.
Which I think is really depressing. If you're an optimistic person, you could consider this film to be part of a different canon, even though it uses the same actor for Larry Talbot. Because this would be the first in a miniseries of Abbott and Costello meeting various characters. Bud Abbott and Lou Costello were a comedy duo in the 1940s and 50s known for their over-the-top routines. You've probably seen their Who's on First routine, at least referenced at some point in your life.
On the St. Louis team, we have who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third. That's what I want to find out. I want you to tell me the names of the fellas on the St. Louis team.
I don't know why anyone would want to watch the team in St. Louis. You could also consider Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein to take place before Talbot's disease is cured in House of Dracula, because it's not really tied to a specific date, but there are little details that make this less likely.
I followed Dracula all the way from Europe because I believe that he's going to try and revive the Frankenstein monster.
However, this might just be a random plot for the Abbott and Costello movie that happens to use the same lineup of monsters from the previous crossover films. In any event, he mitigates his werewolf issue by giving Costello's character his hotel key and asking him to be locked in. I'm not sure if it was actually possible back then to lock someone into a hotel room from the outside. Sounds like a fire hazard to me, but in this case it works. Although I don't think Talbot is getting his deposit back. There's also a scene during the night where Costello goes in to give him his bag, and the Wolfman is much less aggressive and more clumsy than usual, which is done on purpose to create comedy in the scene, but could be further evidence that this is part of a separate continuity, if that's what you want to believe. Anyway, he doesn't play a huge role in this, mostly just trying to warn the Abbott and Costello characters about the other monsters.
Mr. Raymond, would you honor me with the dance?
No. I warn you. He is Count Dracula.
However, he ends up becoming an obstacle himself when he transforms and chases them through the woods. If we do consider this to be a sequel to the other Wolfman films, there is, I guess, a small glimmer of hope for the Wolfman character, in that he no longer seems to be obsessed with ending his life. He's accepted his fate and tries to do what he can to stop the bad guys despite his condition. In the end, he's trying to help rescue Costello's character and undergoes an unfortunately timed transformation. He's drawn away by Dracula and they do battle. And the last time we see him, he chases the Count to a balcony, which he dives off of and catches his prey before crashing into the ocean. If my theory from earlier is correct, and the werewolf only appears as an actual wolf on all fours after succumbing and giving into his animal side, then Talbot is not far from that happening. And this is probably a good place for his story to end. But with 5 appearances over the course of a decade, actor Lon Chaney Jr. had cemented himself as a horror icon, and his clashes with the likes of Frankenstein's monster and Dracula are a testament to that. In the 2000s decade, there was a trend of horror remakes. The 1990s and 2000s were a huge step forward for genre movies as a whole thanks to the advent of digital effects. When done well, digital effects could work together with practical effects to enhance movie scenes in ways that audiences had never seen before.
We're gonna make a fortune with this.
So many icons of the genre were dragged out of retirement. There was a new Texas Chainsaw, Dawn of the Dead, Halloween, and Friday the 13th, just to name a few. It continued into 2010 with A Nightmare on Elm Street and a brand new adaptation of The Wolfman. This movie reinvented Lawrence Talbot by backtracking and placing him in the 1890s, which helped this version capture the feel of the original better than the original does. It's kind of like when a video game has better graphics than real life, it just works perfectly. This time, Lawrence is an actor, which creates a duality between his job, where he pretends to be someone else, and his werewolf transformations, where he does become something else, and he has to deal with the consequences of that. Some of the other differences from the original also raise the tension. His dad is more of a recluse, and Gwen is his brother's widow, making her even more of a forbidden love than in the original. There are also a couple of nice touches that just make sense. The dad's telescope is actually used to observe the moon, don't know how that never happened in the original, and the cane with the silver wolf topper is said to have come from Gévaudan, a little reference to the Beast of Gévaudan and the original silver bullet. Maybe the biggest enhancement to the story is that the werewolf that attacks Lawrence survives, giving us a real antagonist instead of just Talbot battling with himself. In all of the original series, we never got to see two werewolves face off with one another. The character is also expanded in that he has to face some demons from his childhood that he's been running from his entire life. The remake is a gothic epic, and probably the definitive version of Talbot. But where that adaptation took us back to Victorian times, the next adaptation intends to do the opposite, and finally bring us a modern Wolfman. This won't just be the same old deal in a modern setting with modern wolf hair. As I mentioned at the top, the reason that we're getting a new adaptation is because of the success of the 2020 reinvention of another Universal classic monster, the Invisible Man. Directed by Leigh Whannel, the 2020 Invisible Man introduced the element of technology with an invisibility suit composed of cameras and screens, making the protagonist, Cecilia, grow paranoid that she's being watched by an invisible entity. And this Invisible Man slowly ruins her life and makes her look crazy. The movie is a commentary on privacy in the digital age of cameras, constant surveillance, and cyber stalking. Leigh Whannel also directed the 2025 Wolfman. I'm not sure why he titled The Invisible Man remake as The Invisible Man, but his remake of the Wolfman is just called Wolfman. But I hope the new movie says something about modern life that lives up to what the original says about the condition of man. Rather than focus on a man transforming into a beast under moonlight, which audiences have seen, Wolfman derives its horror from the infection of a husband and father, and the encroachment of that infection on his psyche, forcing him to shift from protector to predator against his will. Whannel uses groundbreaking techniques to shift perspective between different characters in the film, allowing us to experience the story from multiple viewpoints. Something that there's very little of in the original, but is definitely warranted for an adaptation that focuses so much on relationships and trust among family. The movie features a man named Blake taking a remote trip into rural Oregon with his wife and daughter, where they're attacked by an animal. As Blake begins to transform into something unrecognizable, his family is forced to decide if the danger inside the house outweighs the threat lurking outside. Remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell, and select all notifications, and I will see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.